So I had purpose to speak a message, and I was really excited about it, and it was called, He Did It All for Us. And the premise of the message was basically, we kind of take a overview of what Jesus has done, and we normally say He died to forgive us of our sins, right? That's what we say. But as I was reading through the Gospels, I saw that Jesus did so many other things. For instance, He was abandoned, but that was done for us. He had people turn his back on it, and that was done for us. Because Jesus could have died and not had all of these other things happen. He could have just went to the cross, died, but not been abandoned, not been betrayed, not had all the other. And so as I'm looking at each of these things, I see that every one of them was done for a specific reason for us. And I'm getting all excited about this message. And then on Friday, I watched something, and I know that God is telling me to abort what I'm supposed to do and teach another message. And I fought God because when you have a message you're excited about, you just want to get it out there. But the more I fought, the more I knew that God wanted me to speak today around this topic. God is with me. God is with me. This is one of the most significant things that Christians have to understand and believe through their Christian lives. But oftentimes in our lives, it is one of the most hardest things to believe based on where we are in our Christian experience. And the reason it's hard for us to believe is because we have developed a matrix, and we use this matrix to determine whether or not God is with us. And oftentimes the matrix is completely unbiblical. Like completely unbiblical. So we've determined that if God is with me, then my life should look a certain way. This should happen, this shouldn't happen. And if these things do happen or don't happen, then it becomes difficult for us to say with confidence that God is with me. Matter of fact, there have been times in my life where I have actually questioned whether or not God is with me. If you look at the life of Job, this was the question that was asked. Satan appears to God, and he says, there is a man named Job, and he worships you for one reason, and that's because the evidence of you being with him is obvious. If you take away some of those things, Job will completely change his mind about you, and he'll turn his back on you. And every time Job said this, blessed is the Lord, he gives and he takes away. What Job was actually saying is, God is still with me. Despite the fact that my life has changed, despite the fact that I have lost so many things, he was saying that God is still with me. See, for us, whenever we go through something or whenever God allows us to go through something, we sometimes question whether or not God is with us. Now, I was told this. I haven't had a chance to research it. But I was told that there are a lot of things in nature that a mother and a father will allow their offspring, to go through. And the reason they do it is it's because for their offspring's benefit. For instance, anybody ever seen a chicken coming out of an egg? The very first thing the chick does is this little thing where it has this little thing on its beak, and it uses it and it makes a little hole in the egg, and it's called pipping. I looked that up last night. And then for 24 hours, this chick fights trying to get out of this egg, all right? It uses its wings, and all of this is done to strengthen it as it gets out. Now, if the mother were to take away the shell and allow the chick to come out, the benefit of the struggle would be lost, and the chick would be weak and unable to deal with the things that it faces as soon as it comes out. So the mother stands by and watches for 24 hours sometimes as this chick fights its way out. And it does it because it loves the chick and it needs the chick to go through this. Now listen, God does the same thing. And sometimes when God is doing it for us, we question whether or not he is with it. Because our matrix typically is, God is with me in my deliverance and in my prosperity. And that's why today we're going to be looking at the life of Joseph. Because Joseph had a completely different matrix. And if you think about our testimonies, every time we stand somebody on the stage for a testimony, it is to talk about deliverance and prosperity. They might say, I went through something, but it always ends with deliverance and prosperity because that's the evidence that God is with us. Suppose we stood somebody on this stage who said, I am struggling, I'm going through this, I'm not out yet, but I still know that God is with me. That's a testimony. But we would never send that person on this stage. You know why? Because people would be confused. They would say, how come you didn't tell us about your deliverance? How am I supposed to know that God is with you when you weren't delivered yet? But God is with us when we're not delivered. God is with us when we're still in it. God is with us when we're still struggling. The other thing our matrix includes is comparison. We've got to take this out of our matrix. Ever had anybody do something to you that you don't like? Ever felt like God wasn't with you while they did it? Here's what we do. We look at other Christians, say we know a Christian. That Christian's not really walking with the Lord, right? But that Christian seems to be getting blessed all over the place. And you're not. We look at unsaved people, and they seem to be getting blessed all over the place. And so we make a comparison. God, how could you be with me when I see, and I'm doing what you asked me to do, when I see all of these people seem to be getting your blessing, I'm waiting for your blessing, I'm doing what is right, but it does not feel like you are with me. And God says, I'm with you. And you say, because of your matrix, that's not enough. Think about this. I was thinking about this the other day after God put this on my heart. And it's even hard to say it. But sometimes in my Christian experience, when I have been going through something, knowing that God is with me hasn't been enough for me. I'll say that again. Sometimes in my Christian experience, when I am going through something, knowing that God is with me has not been enough. Because what I want is the deliverance, I want the prosperity, I want that. And so God, give me that. And God is saying, I'm with you. But sometimes it's not enough for me. So Joseph had a completely different matrix, and we're going to see this based on his life. And we're going to answer a question today. And here's the question. How would your outlook on life change if you believed that God was really with you in every situation that you went through? I want you to think about your life. I want you to think about the stuff that you have been through. And I want you to think back on some of that stuff. And think back on some of the decisions that you took. Do you realize that oftentimes when we are in a situation, we make decisions based on fear, bitterness, untrust, all of these things, we make decisions based on those, and we make them quickly. And by the way, that's what the enemy wants you to do. He wants you to feel a certain thing and then make a quick decision. We make decisions based on those, and oftentimes all of those decisions ignore that God is with us. All of those feelings ignore that God is with us. And oftentimes we walk away from stuff before we are supposed to. Think about this. Israel is on the blessing of God, right on this doorstep of the blessing of God. They're about to enter the promised land, and they all look around and say, God ain't with us. We need to stop. And Joshua and Caleb are saying, no, God is with us. Let's go in. And everybody else is saying, no. I am not going in because God can't be with us because of what I just saw and what I just heard. And so they want to make a decision to abandon the plan of God for their lives because they believe that God can't be with them in this. So, first we're going to go to the very end of Joseph's life, and then after that we're going to go back to the beginning. So here's the very end of Joseph's life. Joseph's brothers are now before him. Joseph is second in command in Egypt. And it says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So even his brothers are acknowledging that what we did to him was wrong. Now listen to this. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid, am I in the place of God? Do you know what am I in the place of God means? This just blows my mind. He is speaking about all the wrongs that have been done to him, and he said, God is the person who determines what's supposed to happen in my life. I would have wanted none of those things to happen, and if I was in God's place, I wouldn't have allowed all of those things to happen, but I'm not in the place of God, so all of those things were supposed to happen to me, and while they were happening, God was with me. He says, am I in the place of God? Then he said, you intended to harm me. And he recognizes that everything that was done to him by these people actually was intended to harm him. But God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Then he says this, and look at the decision he takes. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Now, God is always with us if we are his children. But if we are in rebellion to him, sometimes he is not with us in power. When Israel went to Ai, they lost because they were in rebellion, and God was not with them in power. Now, let me just pause and say something about rebellion, okay? Here's how rebellion works. It promises freedom, but it always brings bondage. This is how rebellion works. You look at other people who aren't Christians and you see their lives, and their lives appear to be free. You know, they do whatever they want. It looks like freedom, but it always brings bondage. So this guy bought these dogs one day, right? And he put them in his backyard. But right next to his backyard was a busy street. So the dogs were running around the backyard. They kept running the street. So what he did then was he built a fence. Why did he build a fence? Because he loved the dogs and he didn't want them to get harmed. So he built this fence for their protection because he was a loving master. But afterwards he noticed that every day the dogs were standing at the fence going, what he built for love and protection, they saw as taking away their freedom. And so every single day, they're standing at the gate saying, I want to be free. I want to be free. Please let me free. And then one day, he forgot to close the gate, so they ran in the street. Now, all of you are waiting. I could see it on your faces, especially you animal lovers. Please don't let them die. So they run in the street. Now they're free. But they didn't die. He gets a call a little later, and he goes down to the pond, and the dogs are now in prison, in doggy prison. So what the dogs basically said was, we want our freedom. We want to rebel against what you did to protect us. But what it did was, it promised them freedom, and it got them bondage. This is exactly what happens in our lives. Sometimes we look at what God has done and the parameters that he has placed around our lives, and we say, it feels restrictive, and we break out and we rebel, and it feels like freedom. But you know what happens? We always wind up in bondage. So, let's go now to the beginning of Joseph's life. So Joseph has a father named Jacob, and he has 12 sons, Joseph and 11 other dudes, right? And Joseph is by far his favorite. Joseph don't have to do no work, and he buys him a coat, which suggests that he don't have to do any work. So Joseph's clothes all comes from Saks Fifth Avenue, whilst all of the other sons' clothes comes from like a thrift store. Like, he makes this guy the favorite, and he makes it obvious to all of them. So then one day, the other guys are out doing their work. They're out in the fields working hard. And so Jacob sends Joseph to him. And Joseph now is riding on his ATV through the desert. He gets to these guys, right? They're all working, and he goes, hey! He's all dressed up in his coat, you know, not coming to work. Hey, how you doing? And then he starts telling them about dreams he's having. Guys, this is wonderful. I had a dream where I'm in command and you guys all bow down to me. Ain't that wonderful? Now, they already struggle with the boy because he's the father's favorite, and now he's telling them that. So they say, we need to kill him. That's pretty drastic. Like, me and my brother had a lot of fights. Actually, I'm pretty sure we've actually thought I need to kill him, but we never really meant it. But these guys meant it. We need to kill this boy. But instead of killing him, they drop him in a pit. They take him out of the pit. They sell him into slavery. He goes down to Egypt, and now is in Potiphar's house. Potiphar is a high up in the command in Egypt, and Joseph's in Potiphar's house, right? This is just such a curious verse. Now, Joseph had been taken. Is that a decision he took? No. Down to Egypt, Potiphar, an Egyptian who was on one of the Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him, another thing that he wouldn't have wanted, from the Ishmaelite who had taken him there. And then it says the strangest thing. The Lord was with Joseph. Now, I don't know about you, but if I just got dropped in a pit by my brothers and sold into slavery, and somebody said to me, the Lord is with me, you know what I would say? Could he please be with me a little less? No, seriously. Like, this is at the lowest point in a man's life. And in the Bible, tacks on, the Lord was with Joseph. Do you realize that when Joseph, and we're going to get there, finally gets to the palace where he's in a position of power, it never ever says that the Lord is with Joseph? You know why? Because God knew that when we read that he was in the palace doing really well, we would just assume that God was with Joseph. We would go, look at his station in life. His second in command of Egypt. He's got all of these people under his feet, including Potiphar. Clearly, God is with Joseph. But when we look at this, see, we read this story with knowing the whole story. But come on, think about this. If you were Joseph, you were taken, you were bought, and then somebody came to you and said, the Lord is with you, brother. You would look at them and go, what? The Lord is not with me. Matter of fact, the Lord appears to be with my brothers. Because all their plans, all their schemes seem to be working out. And here I am in slavery. How could you possibly be telling me that the Lord is with me? Now, this verse, these next verses blow my mind. Genesis 39, 3-4. Listen to this. When his master Potiphar saw that the Lord was with him, that's Joseph. Now think about this, think about this. Joseph is sold into slavery, and somehow, while he is there, his master Potiphar is able to see by how Joseph lives his life that God is with him. I want you to think about this. Because there were a lot of other slaves in this household. All of them were being obedient because they had to. They could lose their lives if they didn't. But somehow, Potiphar looks at Joseph and the way that he goes about his duties and goes, God's got to be with this guy. Now, how does Joseph do this? How does Joseph live in a manner in which his life demonstrates to Potiphar that God is with him? Because if that was me, I would have been moping around that place going, I can't believe I'm here. This is ridiculous. The reason he was able to do this is because even in this, he understood that God was with him. What does it take for you to understand that God is with you? Does it take just deliverance? Does it take just prosperity? Or is it enough that he tells you? Because I'm telling you right now, there have been times in my Christian experience where I was at such a place where I read scripture and I would see things that tell me that he'll never leave me, he'll never forsake me. And I would say, based on where I was, that right now I felt like he has left me and he has forsaken me. And because I felt like he has left me and he has forsaken me, I lived in a way that demonstrated that I felt like he had left me and he had forsaken me. But somehow Joseph lived in a manner which communicated to his master that the Lord was with him. Blows my mind. How? How, when you are in this place? I mean, when everything's going right in my life, it is easy for me to live in a manner that will let all of you know that God is with me. Of course, God is with me. But Joseph did it in a place where it made even more impact. Because, I don't know about you, if I was Potiphar and Joseph was whistling, I'm not saying, I don't know he did this, but if he was whistling while he worked, if he had a good attitude, if he was like really attentive to stuff, making sure he did his best job, I'd be looking at him going, what is wrong with this guy? Why in the world is he doing this as a slave? Joseph found favor. And here's why he found favor. Because he lived in a manner which suggested that he still believed that God was with him. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to everything to his care, everything that Potiphar earned. Now, this has got to be like the end of this story, right? This has got to be God's deliverance. And now we see Joseph riding off into the sunset, and everything's good. But then Potiphar's wife, it says, looks at Joseph and sees that he is very much like me. That is, he's handsome. Why are you covering your face? You must have made this decision about me at some point. All right. Or maybe God made you. All right, so she looks at him and sees that he's handsome. It basically says his face was handsome and he had a good body. That was me. All right? And so she walks up to him and she says, basically here's what she says. I know this is crude, but she says, Joseph, sex now. That's basically what she says to him. Joseph says to her, how then, this blows my mind too, could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Now, think about this again. Here is a man who was thrown in a pit, sold into slavery, and his reason for not doing it is, I don't want to sin against my God. Now think about this. Joseph somehow is in a place where he doesn't want to be. He was taken, he was bought, but even in that place, he makes decisions based on whether God will approve of what he does or not. Sometimes you and I, we get in a place where we don't want to be. The last thing that we think about is whether or not God would approve because we feel like he's not with us anyway. Then he says this, and though she spoke to Joseph day after day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Joseph said, I don't even want to be in the same room as you. Then we know what happens. She gets around Joseph. Joseph says no. Joseph runs. She snatches Joseph's coat. And then she goes to Potiphar and says, listen, he tried to have sex with me. I fought him off, and here's the coat to prove it. Right? So now, did Joseph do what God wanted him to do? He did. So, he got sold into slavery, all of this stuff happens, but still he's faithful to God. So obviously, no bad thing would happen to him now, right? I mean, he's proved to be a faithful servant of God. Then we read this. Joseph's master is taken again, against his will. Other people seem to have control of his life. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison. The place where the king's prisoners were confined is now confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness. Every time Joseph is in the worst place he could possibly be, the next sentence is, the Lord was with him. This messes up my matrix. Because my matrix says, when I'm in a prison, confined for something I didn't do, God has left me. But this says, when I'm in a prison, when Joseph's in a prison, confined for something he didn't do, the Lord is with him and he's showing him kindness. And the thing that blows my mind again, ladies and gentlemen, is that you know what Joseph does in prison? He lives as if God is with him. And he gets recognized again. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care. You know what that means? He trusted Joseph so much that he didn't have to go and check on anything Joseph's done. You ever had a boss that checks on everything you ever done, never trust you? I know how that feels. I had one a long, long time ago, and she was probably right for doing it because I was terrible at what I was doing. But Joseph was so trusted by this man that anything that Joseph done, he never checked on it. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success. Now, one more verse before we go into a couple of points that blows my mind is this. So we think that this should be the end of Joseph's story, right? So then we have two of Pharaoh's servants get thrown in jail with Joseph. They both have dreams. Joseph interprets them. One of them is really good, and that guy is about to leave the prison, and Joseph says, look, just remember me. And the guy says, yeah, I've got you. And then 2 years later, the guy hasn't remembered Joseph. 2 years. Now, surely Joseph's bitter now and he's saying, God, oh my word, God, I don't know, I pray, and So then Pharaoh has a dream. Nobody can interpret it. And the guy says, I remember a guy in prison who can interpret dreams. Go get him. So Joseph comes and stands before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Listen to what Joseph says. I cannot do it. Joseph replied, but God, how does he have this confidence in God? What has been going on in the prison that would cause Joseph to have such confidence in God? But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Now listen. First of all, this is a crazy thing for Joseph to say, and just by him saying it shows the confidence he has in God, because pharaohs were considered gods. And if you spoke about another god, you could get in a lot of trouble. So Joseph has so much confidence in God that he feels comfortable with saying, but God will do it. Now, Joseph's life is a picture of what it looks like to live with the assurance that in all things God is with us. Point number one. God was as much with Joseph in the pit and the prison as he was with Joseph in the palace. That is true, but it is the point that we really need to believe and to live. And here's why it's important. Because when you are in the pit and the prison, again, what the enemy desires you to do is to concentrate and focus on what you feel and how you feel, and then make some radical decisions about your life based on that. And those decisions will exclude the fact that God is with you. Second thing, God being with you does not mean you have to ignore or downplay your pain. If you are in pain, go to God with your pain. You also don't have to ignore the sins of others. Joseph calls what they did to him evil, right? But it's a matter of focus, okay? We're not supposed to focus on these things. We focus on God while we address these things. So there was a woman who walked up to her pastor and she said, Pastor, I'm leaving the church. And so the pastor said, okay, can you tell me why? And she said, because I sit down and I look around the church and I see you speaking. I see people on the phones. I see people talking. I see hypocritical people. And she goes on a list of all of these things. So the pastor says, I want you to do one thing for me before you leave. And what he does is he fills up a glass of water right to the top. And so the church service starts. And his speaking, he said, here's what I want you to do. Let's say we were in here. I want you to walk from there, all the way around, out the back to there, and keep doing that while the service is on. And I don't want you to spill a drop of water. So she starts doing it. The service is going on all around, and she's doing it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So at the end of the service, the pastor walks up to her and says, what did you notice? She said, I didn't notice anything. I was focusing on the water. And he looks at her and says, that's your problem. When you're in church, you're supposed to be focused on Jesus, but you're focused on everything else. And this is often how we live our Christian lives, focused on everything else but Jesus. Now, here's what he's not saying. Don't ignore your pain. Don't ignore what people have done. But while you are in it, still act as if there is a God who is with you. Because if you do not, you will make decisions you regret. Look, there are a number of things that make it easier for us to believe that God is with us. I don't know about you, but it was easy for me to believe that God was with this church when this place was full. Easy. It's a little bit more difficult now for me to believe that God was with it now that it's not full. Now, here's what we would do as leaders. We could make decisions ignoring that God is with us and make drastic decisions and go, we need to do this, we need to do this. No, we still need to make decisions as if God is with us, because whether it's 600 people or 200, God is with us. And we need to act like it. And I haven't been acting like this some Sundays. I walk in here all discouraged, but God is with us. And I want to live like God is with us. And I will not make no rush decision. I will wait for God to tell us what to do, because I want to make decisions that He decides, not that I decide because I'm afraid or because I'm scared or because I'm bitter. I want to live like God is with us. Fourth thing, God being with us is not always evident, but it is always true. How could it be evident that God was with Joseph and he was in a pit? It is not evident, but it is true. You know how I know it's true? Because it is written in Scripture. How could it be evident with Joseph that God is with him and he is sold into slavery? You know how I know it's true? Because it says in the Bible that while he was there, God was with him. How could it be true that a man is given to prison for something he didn't do and God is with him? You know how I know it's true? Because in my Bible, it says that when he was in prison, God was with him and showed him kindness. I know it to be true. Why? Because it says it. Now, here's a beautiful way how God is with us. This is a Japanese, I gave this illustration a long time ago, but this is a Japanese thing called kintsugi. Excuse me if you're Japanese and I messed that right up. But what they do is they get pottery that's all broken, stuff that we would throw away. And then they take gold or silver powder and they put it all in the cracks. They put the pottery together. Once the pottery is back together, it is stronger than it once was, and it is more valuable. Right? So here's what God does. God allows you to go through things, cracks form, and then He puts Himself in the cracks. So that after you have been through it and you know that God is with you, you are stronger and more valuable to Him because of how He did it. Last thing, I want to talk to you about some 2018 real-life Josephs. Deuteronomy 31:8. The Lord Himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid and do not be discouraged. He tacks these on because He knows that that's what you're prone to feel. I want to talk to you about 2018 Josephs, and that's Dan and Violet Obate. I speak to Dan and Violet every Thursday. And every Thursday, I wind up encouraged. It blows my mind. So here's a couple. They conceive and they're excited. Shortly into the pregnancy, they get told that your baby will not live. It's better that you abort. But they say, no, God is with us. Every expert they speak to tells them that the condition that their baby has is severe and it is not conducive to life. Every time they go to the hospital, they are told the same thing over and over and over again. But they said, God is with us. They sat in a doctor's office, looked that doctor in the face, and said, I believe that God is going to make our child healthy. And the doctor laughed at them. He grinned at them. And then, miraculous stuff happens. Miraculous stuff happens. They have something that they never intended to use, which causes them to be able to go to Canada and have you know how they got to Canada? They didn't have a pediatrician. The doctor said, well, you need to get a pediatrician. This is like a week before they went to Canada. Dan walked into a, that one, right? And he said, I want to see a pediatrician. Give me the next available one. So the next available comes, and it's Tess's pediatrician. Dan walks in the office, sits down, and says, God has appointed you to be my daughter's pediatrician. That's the first thing he says to her. He presents everything to her, and she's like, oh, my goodness. You've hit me with a lot. But it is her that calls everybody and says, this child needs to go to Canada right now. She's the one that made it happen. If it wasn't for that, the child would have been born in Bermuda. So they go to Canada, and in Canada, miraculous things happen. They get told by the doctor that your room is on the end, this big room on the end, so that when your daughter comes out and passes away, you can mourn in peace. Daughter comes out. She gets a score of 9 on whatever, 9 out of 10 on that scale, which says whether or not daughters are healthy, whether or not your child is healthy. They're asked then, do you want us to feed the baby? Because if we don't feed the baby, in a couple of days, the baby will just be out of its misery. They said, no, God is with us. And then a series of amazingly miraculous things happen over and over again. They meet people. Like Dan got in a taxi, and it's this person, and Dan tells the story of a child. The child has a cleft lip. He says, oh, I know somebody who had an operation in this hospital, had a cleft lip. That person picks Dan up and drives him to the airport and shows him pictures of everything that happened and tells him what it's like. Dan meets all of these people. It just blows my mind. Then they got a report from the doctor that says, we thought it was severe. It's not. Now it's mild. They said that the baby's muscles would be weak and it might not be able to walk. They got a report that the baby's muscles are strong. They were told that the baby had club feet. They go to the pediatrician thinking that's the case. The pediatrician says, no, this baby's feet's fine. And the baby is now almost a month. She's over a month. I can't wait to see her. I want to get there as soon as possible. I want to hug her. I want to kiss her. But listen, these are people who said, I make decisions based on the fact that God is with me. They looked in the face of doctors who said, nothing about your report suggests that God is with me, but I believe he is because it's written. And so you can tell me what you want, but I will decide based on whether or not God is with me. And God is challenging you today to make decisions in your life based on the fact that you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is a loving God who is with you. He's with you. He is with you. And last Thursday, I was talking to Dan. Violet was sleeping. I told Dan, first of all, communicate to Violet, never let her sleep at this time. She knows what time I'm calling. She needs to be up. And Azaria was sleeping. And normally I hear her crying in the background. And Dan said, I walked out of onto the streets in Toronto, and this man who I didn't know walked up to me and said, you have blessings on your head. And Dan said, what? Because he had never heard it spoken like that. You're blessed, whatever, but you have blessings on your head. Then he said, he opened up his devotional the next day, and there was a line in the devotional that said, you have blessings on your head. And I said, man, let me tell you something. Thursdays at 8:30, I talk to him, and I can't wait. I can't wait because there is so much that God has poured into their life. Now imagine that Joseph decided early on that God wasn't with him. We wouldn't have this story. Imagine if Dan and Violet decided when they were first saying the best thing you could do is abort. Imagine if they would have decided that God is not with me. We would not have this story. How many things in your life do we not have the story for because you decided God is not with us? Father, you knew every situation that exists in this church and in our individual lives. And Lord, you know that just because things are written in your word, it's not always easy for us to apply them or to live. Lord, we need you. We need your strength. We need you to be alive in us. And God, I pray for every single person in the place that they are in, that they would recognize that there is a God who is with them. Lord, I pray that we would make decisions. Just because we've seen certain things, we're fearful, we're bitter, and God, we make decisions based on that. Thank you, Lord, for even putting in your word the life of Joseph, so that we can see that just because we know you, just because we love you, it doesn't mean that we won't go through things, but it does not mean that you have left us. Father, today I pray that you would cause us to live like people who know that wherever they go, that wherever they are, that whatever circumstance they are in, there is a God who is with them. Lord, help us to walk out today in confidence, knowing that even though everything might not be right, even though everything might not resolve itself today, you remain God. In Jesus' name. Amen. Come on, let's celebrate God. Let's thank him that he is always with us. Our service is over. Have an awesome day with a God who loves you enough, that is always with you.
This message has been brought to you by Cornerstone Bible Fellowship Bermuda. To connect with us, visit us at www.cornerstone.bm. Or if you have a prayer request, email us at prayer@cornerstone.bm.